Nobody knew what was wrong with me for decades. Why would I have all this arthritis as a perfectly clean, organic vegetarian all through my 20s? Why would I have a sleep disorder where I could not sleep and could no longer work or exercise? How could my whole health be falling apart when I'd been eating for health and nutrition my whole life? Oxalates are multiple compounds, and plants make oxalic acid, which is the mother compound, and they build calcium oxalate crystals. They all are trying to get you in the gut. Common symptoms can include things like mood changes, problem with sleeping, irritability, headaches, anxiety and depression, vision changes, needing eyeglasses, getting night vision issues, hearing issues, tooth pain, cavities, heart palpitations, muscle weakness.
So, what is the solution to all of this? Alrighty, today we are here with Sally Norton, author of the book Toxic Superfoods, and we're going to discuss how many of the foods that we've been taught are good for us may not actually be very good for us. So, Sally, I'd love to ask you first, how did you get into all of this? How did you discover that spinach was bad for us? You had a number of problems. Can you share some of that with us?
Well, I knew from college, I studied nutrition in college and decided to do that as a 12-year-old. And was interested in eating well since I was a little kid. So I was into gardening and vegetables ever since I was little, and always trusted these foods, was told they're great. My family grew up on things like beet greens and Swiss chard, which is equivalent to spinach in the same way in terms of this toxicity. And in college, what they teach you is that this compound that's in spinach causes kidney stones. It's the major ingredient in kidney stones. And so people with renal problems and kidney disease, especially kidney stones, need to be off spinach. So I knew about this. It's called a low oxalate diet. It's a therapeutic diet that's been around a long time. But in mainstream medicine, we just think it's for the kidney stones. And so it was a shock to me to learn much, much, much later, after decades of suffering with really awful problems, that it's way more than that, that it messes up your nervous system, destroys your connective tissue and your vascular tissue. And for me, I can't begin to describe how tormentingly shocking it was to realize that I myself, with a degree in nutrition and public health and all this knowledge in integrative and holistic healing, in a huge connection of colleagues who are doctors, chiropractors, and holistic healers and alternative providers, nobody knew what was wrong with me for decades. And we kept guessing at the wrong things. And really, it just looked like I just had a lemon of a body. Why would I have bad feet in my 20s and not be able to use my feet for 30 years? Why would I have all this arthritis as a perfectly clean, organic vegetarian all through my 20s? Why would I end up with endometriosis and need a hysterectomy? Why would I have a sleep disorder where I could not sleep and could no longer work or exercise? How could my whole health be falling apart when I'd been eating for health and nutrition my whole life? I realized if you don't know, then who's going to know? Like, anyone in my situation is going to need a tip. Yeah.
So you had all these things wrong with you, couldn't find a cause, and so you started digging. And what made you come to the conclusion that, oxalates was what was doing this to you?
Well, thank goodness, there's a woman, Joanne Yan, who founded the Vulvar Pain Foundation in North Carolina. She's based in North Carolina, and she started this thing in the early 90s. It's been maybe since 91 or 2, over 30 years, I believe, that she's been teaching a low oxalate diet to fix pelvic pain, starting with vulvar pain, which is genital pain in women. It's really severe. I mean, you can't wear underwear, you can't sit, you can't do anything. It's really bad. And I had a tiny little 2 or 3 day episode with that was intense enough. I actually said out loud, I said, somebody cut these off because I don't need genitals. I was like, I'm done. And my husband heard that, and he did he's brilliant at Google, and he found the Vulvar Pain Foundation. And I'm like, what? And so they're teaching this low oxalate diet for vulvar pain. And they quickly discovered that there's a connective tissue thing going on, because when they remove these high oxalate foods like spinach and chard and beet greens and chocolate and nuts and peanut butter and so on, take them out of the diet for the vulvar pain, and then the fibromyalgia goes away and the ability to walk upstairs gets better and you get stronger. And all kinds of other things start improving. So they were able to characterize a connective tissue disorder reversal, so to speak, or remission with this diet. So that was completely out of left field. In fact, at the time when I read it in her materials, I thought, I have all the symptoms of a connective tissue disorder. But I don't remember ever learning about that in school or in my subsequent reading and understanding, even thinking in terms of connective tissue disorder. That's exactly what I have. And then later on, it became clear that that was why my problems with my feet, which caused me to drop out of Cornell for 4 years and get foot surgery that I didn't recover well from and need all kinds of continued care and never was able to go barefoot or run or really use my feet, racket sports, anything like that. For 3 more decades after my foot surgery, I was still in trouble with feet until I got on this diet. And then I was suddenly able to go bare feet and wear high heels and do things. I could run barefoot on pavement when I spent 3 decades with bad feet. So what that was a weakness in the connective tissue causing a spreading in the foot that would instigate pain and fatigue quickly in the feet. Well, the foot is interesting tissue. It's a 2 or 3 way arch that is able to absorb shocks and not damage itself when it's healthy. And you need connective tissue that can absorb shocks. That's why there's these arch shapes in the foot. But really good connective tissue that holds it together. If the connective tissue is overstretching and weak, then that extra stretch creates pain and problems in the tissues. So you see this in this Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and other kind of loosey-goosey connective tissue syndromes where you end up with a pain syndrome. So for me, that was all. I didn't understand any of that from my anatomy classes, my physiology, my integrative medicine, my nutrition. How could a plant toxin mess up your connective tissue? It's not in the literature. Your vascular system, your nervous system, your renal system, your eyeballs, your teeth. It's like, oh, okay, so maybe it's more than just kidney stones. But if you put all your funding and all your research into just kidney researchers who are trying to talk about kidney stones, they're not interested in your feet. They'll never connect it. It takes a higher level understanding of physiology, a higher understanding of toxicity, a higher level understanding of nutrition itself and of the human body. And these days, we are so compartmentalized. It's a silo system with research. There's different agencies that fund research in the United States. One will fund the kidneys and diabetes. Another one will fund something else and something else. And, you don't, even though we've been for 30 years in American research, trying on paper to create a world where you have collaboration and you have innovation, we don't get any of that, really, not meaningfully.
So oxalates caused you a number of problems, and there are many foods that you used to eat and that most people eat on a day-to-day basis. But how do they actually work? What do they do to us from, at a biological level?
Well, the oxalates are multiple compounds, and plants make oxalic acid, which is the mother compound, and they build calcium oxalate crystals in these various shapes. So when you're eating a plant like spinach, peanuts, potatoes, chocolate that are high in oxalate, it's oxalic acid plus oxalate crystals. So those things are both, by the way, in many foods that we trust, past spinach, and the amounts in them exceed our ability to get rid of it because some of it gets into the bloodstream. You can't get it out of the plant. So any form, both the crystals and the acid are irritating to the cells and disrupts the membrane structure and function and causes the kind of damage to both the outer membrane, the mitochondria, and so on. It lifts the state of metabolic stress where you get oxidative stress, where you have more free radicals forming and problems than you can squelch. So the cells lose control over that, what we call redox balance, and they get into trouble. It can cause them to die young and misfire and misfunction. And over time, as you absorb the oxalic acid, the crystals in the plants just irritate membranes on the surface. So they're actually harder than your teeth. So you can get dental microwear from chewing on plants with these crystals. The crystals can damage and even puncture 2 cells deep along the mucous membranes of the mouth, the throat, the stomach, and so on. So it can cause direct mechanical damage. And then the oxalic acid easily floats in the water between the cells of the digestive tract and it gets into the bloodstream. So at least 10% is getting in there. And that getting into the bloodstream goes into the liver, travels through the blood vessels up to the heart and into the lungs and back into the heart again. And it's moving all through your vascular system. And eventually the kidneys remove most of it. But the amount we're eating, meal in and meal out, and meal in and meal out, begins to way exceed our excretion capacity. So in the meantime, you're exposing your gut and critical organs to oxalate. A lot of it gets excreted, but not all of it. So over time, it's building up in your tissues, your eyeballs, your thyroid gland, your tendons, your bones, your bone marrow, maybe your brain, and eventually your kidneys. And so you got these little crystals forming. It starts off as oxalic acid. It finds calcium and calcium finds it, and it starts pairing up into this oxalate molecule that then precipitates out, especially in areas where you have dead and dying cells, where you've bruised or used the tissue too much, or have inflammation or infection. There's like vacuoles and other cellular debris in places, and that will stimulate this precipitation of oxalic acid and oxalate molecules into crystals. So you start forming crystals, they stick to these tissues that are stressed, dying, or reproducing, even newly regenerating cells that are healing from these things like day-to-day wear and tear, have a different character that makes them stickier for crystals. So you get this crystal retention in tissues. The immune system has to manage these crystals, kind of bury them, make it quiet and asymptomatic. But later, and even early on, it can be immune damaging at first because oxalic acid in your bloodstream messing with your white blood cells causes them damage. They become inflamed and they can no longer fight infection. So right after spinach salad, spinach smoothie, spinach pizza, chia this, hemp that, almond this, dark chocolate this, whatever they are, this forms of oxalic acid is already damaging your circulating immune cells and affecting your ability to fight infection. But then later, you've got these crystals collecting in your bones, bone marrow, and elsewhere that can be ongoing immune stimulation problem because crystals, this is particulate pollution forming in tissues, turning on your immune system randomly, eventually can lead to autoimmune-like symptoms. The other thing is that it's forming in places like bones and bone marrow because that's where there's a heavy load of calcium. So there's a natural kind of magnetism that bones have for the oxalate. So eventually you've got oxalate crystals in the bone marrow. Now, that's where your white blood cells are born and your red blood, like blood cells are formed in bone marrow, but if there's poison there, it affects them. So they can be born early, kicked out before they're ready, have problems already when they're being made, and then you go and eat some more spinach and you nail them again. So this building up in tissues is a very serious thing because it's all subtle. It doesn't have symptoms for the most part, but you're creating a problem for later that can lead to long-term issues that don't quickly reverse. And people like me who ate this healthy food and loved her bee creams as a little kid, it's a long, long recovery process. It's not one I would wish on anyone.
Mm. And what does this look like when it plays out? What sort of symptoms do people typically tend to suffer from?
It's really interesting because there is a set of symptoms that are common where you can see this picture of, multiple things going wrong in someone or not. Sometimes there aren't any symptoms. So I think the most common thing is you don't have symptoms. You're like, it doesn't bother me. Not yet. And you may get through decades of feeling fantastic. And then something happens and it breaks the whole system that's keeping the symptoms away breaks. And sometimes that's something like a car accident, a death, too much stress, giving birth, something that requires a lot of energy from you can suddenly expose this problem. So the first symptom is nothing, but common symptoms can include things like mood changes, problem with sleeping, irritability, headaches, anxiety and depression, vision changes, needing eyeglasses, getting night vision issues, hearing issues, tooth pain, cavities, tartar on the teeth, heart palpitations, muscle weakness, You've got urinary tract issues where you might be getting up at night to pee. You might suddenly have urinary urgency and you have hardly any urine, frequent urination where you can't hold, the bladder doesn't hold. The urine bladder infections or the symptoms of them, I would encourage people, if you think you have a bladder infection, be sure to culture it and make sure it's really an infection, because a lot of the time it's symptoms of immune activation, but there's not really a bacterial overgrowth. It's because things like the oxalate crystals in your urine is causing problems for the bladder. So you get that urinary tract problem. If you have a kidney stone, absolutely you need to be paying attention to oxalate, because that's really a late stage. If by the time you have kidney stones, you've been at it for a while and your system is not able to effectively remove it without this, the little crystals start sticking together and get stuck. And some people don't have all the mechanisms for avoiding that, getting it out. A lot of us, like me, though, we never get kidney stones, no matter how toxic we are with oxalate. Don't wait to get kidney stones to change your diet. So then there's the connective tissue stuff. If you have arthritis, gout, aches and pains, unexplained, either rheumatism or whatever, or tendency to pain syndromes, fibromyalgia, lots of infections. If you get chronic infections, say sinus infections, yeast infections, urinary tract infections, these are all potentially signs of oxalate poisoning. Fatigue is another big one because it really nails your ability to produce ATP. Anemia, low blood counts, these could all be symptoms.
So basically, it causes every issue under the sun.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And the reason is this: it's easy to understand it if you're willing to. A lot of people are stuck in this mindset, one problem produces one problem. Like it's not like that when you're messing up the basic physiology of cells. You're messing up your vascular system. You're interfering with neurological function. You're interfering with hormonal function. You're slowing down energy in cells. You're starting to damage the thyroid gland and the pituitary gland and your pancreas and your stomach lining, and you're destroying your digestive power. Actually, stomach issues are probably the most common sign of oxalate. That was considered in the 1840s a necessary part of the diagnosis, is that you had some kind of digestive disorder. Yeah.
How would someone know that oxalates are causing their problems and it's not some other factor?
Well, once you learn how to get oxalates out of your diet, and of course, a full carnivore diet is a zero plant diet, essentially, and that's a zero oxalate diet because there's very little oxalates in animal foods. There might be traces in tuna fish and so on, but essentially that's a zero oxalate diet, which is extremely low. And some people do early on in carnivore start having problems, and that's a sign. So if you get off the oxalate and you start either feeling way better or way worse, it could be because your day-to-day symptoms of whatever, fatigue, bad sleep, grumpiness, whatever they were, peeing all the time, if they get better, that's because you stop poisoning yourself acutely. But after about 3 days or sometimes 6 years, but 3 days gives the body enough time to go, hey, wait a minute, there's no more coming in. That means I can get this out of the thyroid gland, out of the bone marrow, out of my elbow and shoulder joints, out of my kneecaps. Like the body will start, and this can be immune stimulating because the immune system has to go in there and deaccumulate this stuff. And that can feel a little bit like getting surgery without anesthetic. And you start suddenly feeling way worse. Peeing at night, cloudy urine, crystally stools, extra tartar on the teeth, extra grit coming out of the eyes. All kinds of things will start to surface. Some people get skin rashes, heat rashes, all kinds of different skin issues. So if you go low in oxalate, feel good for a few days or a couple of years, and then all of a sudden you're like full of rashes and peeing on yourself, this could be it. And you can play around with oxalate. Add more, the symptoms get better, you take it away, and you go in and out. So that's kind of hard to understand, that the oxalic acid is now crystals stored in your tissues. You stop eating oxalic acid, and the crystals stored in your tissues are now possibly able to be removed by the body. And when the body is ready to do that, is going to be different for each person. Some people are so sick with it and so already attempting. I think women, their immune systems are so active, they're more likely to start clearing this oxalate, doing this deaccumulation work pretty quickly after they go on a low oxalate diet, like a carnivore diet. and it's more men that's come to me where they have a delayed response to this. 2 years, 3 years, 6 years after going on a carnivore diet, all of a sudden they're seeing all this stuff happening with the grit and the skin rashes and the nighttime waking up and the peeing all over the place.
Wow. So how does someone avoid this oxalate dumping then? Is there a method, or is it just, you got to get through it?
So the body's reading a level of oxalate probably in the bloodstream. And after every, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then spinach smoothie, and then sweet potato, that was the one for me, and it's like dark chocolate. These foods, the quinoa, you name it. These high oxalate meals cause a little spike in the bloodstream and the urine that lasts for 4 to 10 hours. And you overlap them if you eat every 4 hours. And sometimes you can tell because in the morning you feel differently than you do at bedtime. At bedtime, after 3 meals, it's high in the bloodstream. So the body, when it's high in the bloodstream, cannot release it from your tissues because that high bloodstream level is very dangerous. It's in a position to change your electrolytes in your blood if it starts binding with calcium and you lower active calcium ions. Without those calcium ions, your pacemaker starts going bananas and you start getting arrhythmias. And you get more inflammation afterwards, and that can cause potassium loss. That can contribute to heart symptoms. So your body is like, not cool with leaving oxalate in the bloodstream, which is why you end up with the tissues. Because I think there's a deliberate effort to sequester, hold onto it in the tissues. It's okay, get it out of the bloodstream, just like we do in the kidneys. The same thing happens in the kidneys. When there's too much coming into the kidney tubules that are forming urine, the kidney cells themselves will pull it into the kidney tissue. And over time, you get this nephrocalcinosis. It's a deliberate attempt to avoid kidney stones and protect your kidney health. So the body holds on to oxalate to protect your health, but there's a sacrifice going on. And once the blood levels are down, it's like, okay, now I can clean up the kidney. Oh, and by the way, I can clean up my kneecap and my elbow and my back and my hip. And you can start having these responses because the oxalate level in the blood is low. And I think if it gets too high from either from the removal or from the meal, it slows down that release process. So the way for you to not go through this deaccumulation too fast, because it's very dangerous to let it go crazy because it's too much immune activation and stress on the body, and is more likely to promote allergies and forms of things that look like autoimmune disease because it's too much immune activation. So you want to add back, not a toxic level like a big spinach something or other, but a minor level, maybe something that's a third, a fifth, a tenth of what you was in your spinach smoothie. So if you were doing a spinach smoothie of 1,000 milligrams twice a day, that's a quarter of the way to a lethal dose. If you're going to do 8 spinach smoothies, could kill you. Go down to something that's like 10 spinach leaves instead of 600 leaves in your smoothie. And that little amount will elevate oxalate temporarily, just enough to remind the body, oxalate's coming in from the diet, so therefore don't keep digging it out of the tissues at such a vast rate.
Mm-hmm. So it's actually dangerous to go from, say, even a keto approach with lots of spinach to jump straight into carnivore. You advise against that?
Generally, that is very risky. Yeah, it's not. A lot of people get away with it, but the people that don't can get so sick, and they are often so sick without an explanation. So they let it go on and on. They assume, well, this is just the keto flu. This is just some kind of like adjustment, some kind of metabolic adaptation stage, and they try to. But then even if like a week or 2 goes by and then, okay, I'm past that stage. Now what? They don't have answers. So it's so important if you're going to get off high oxalate plants. If you can do it more gradually, that helps kind of sneak out of the situation a little bit. So you don't have to it's really, I think that's the differential, like really high and really low. That's such a strong message to the body. Like, wow, oh, wow, peace and quiet, low. But if you come down a little more slowly, it's kind of like sneaking out of a situation, tiptoeing backwards. See if the body can just kind of be a little chill about it and not get real excited about this deaccumulation. And I think one reason, this is a theory of mine, is that the most recently consumed oxalates are not quite sequestered. They're not quite locked away in their little prison cells down in your tissues. They're a little bit loose, moving around too.
Hmm. So how long will this oxalate dumping process last?
It's really different for everybody, and what it looks like is really different, and the process comes and goes. So you'll have periods of time where you have a lot of crazy symptoms, and then you feel a little better, and it should be turning on and off, on and off. And you can, if you're like me and you've been around forever, like us old dames who came up in the 70s, like vegetarian was so cool back then. We were going to save the planet. We were going to save the animals, and we were best of all going to be the healthiest one on the block. So like juicing carrots and all this stuff has been around since the 60s and earlier, way earlier. Actually, weird fattest diets have been around for hundreds of years, like living on bran and things like that. Everyone thinks like, oh, well, we got it now. But let me tell you, we've already been there. And so all this lifetime of eating too many vegetables and trusting the nuts and going to town on this makes for a long recovery period. And I don't know if you completely get out of it, but I would say expect at least 6 years, with possibly year 3, 4, and maybe even 5 being harder than year 1 and 2.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, before we talk about some, the foods that contain the most oxalates, one thing I'd like to talk to you about is personality disorders caused by oxalates. I was out for a walk the other day and I heard you talking about this. I thought it was incredibly fascinating. So you're telling me that if one of my mates starts acting a bit strange, it might be because he's eating too much spinach.
Yeah, it's so neurotoxic. It makes people have panic attacks, and they lose their morale, they lose their motivation, where they like completely don't care about anything, and can get a really bad attitude, or get super grumpy, or get anxious or depressed. All those things can get much better on a low oxalate diet. So that's why we know it's so connected. A lot of people had to convince me of this. People came to me with a lifetime of severe depression and said, Sally, I need your help because it's the oxalates, and they can tell. And it'd be nice to talk to people who've really had this mood thing shift. You see this also with this oxalate clearing cycling. When your body's digging up oxalates, your mind is like, oh my God, and your future is so bleak. I love the old literature that talked about anticipation of impending doom is a symptom of oxalate poisoning. Because you're looking down the road, you're like, oh my God, and my leg's going to have to be cut off. I'm going to die of cancer. This is terrible. This can't be oxalates. It's just like, this is a toxic brain. So, yeah, you definitely, when you're really got oxalate going on in the mind, you're not really fun to hang out with.
That's very interesting. So maybe all these hippie chicks who go to Thailand for the retreats to find their life's purpose could just cut out the spinach for a bit.
Exactly. And be careful of those wonderful massages there in Thailand, because it can stimulate the oxalate dumping.
Good to know. Good to know. So what do we reckon the solution to all of this is? Do we reckon everyone should be on a carnivore diet? Because obviously oxalates aren't the only plant toxin. We've got every single plant has a long list of them.
Very long list. Yeah, and it's just as an aside to talk about all of them in one breath. They all are trying to get you in the gut. Mm-hmm. And so eventually you overdo plants, eventually you'll have some kind of digestive disorder. For sure. So yeah, less plant toxins. And that's probably why we do white rice and we soak it and we throw out the water, which reduces phytates and arsenic naturally occurring there. Why, white bread? This is a refinement, getting rid of some of the worst toxins in the bran. The bran is where the oxalate tends to be concentrated in other toxins, because that's a protective layer. So we have done food processing for a long time, including soaking beans. You need to soak them for 3 or 4 days to get the germination started. Then you high heat cook them in a pressure cooker, and that gets rid of the lectins. But you can't do that with oxalates. No amount of heat or soaking will lower oxalates. You can sometimes boil some of it out and throw out the cooking water, but it's not easy to remove oxalates from food. Whereas other toxins, you can disarm some of them. But we need the nutrients that are in animal foods. We absolutely need some animal foods in our diets. And I think the more animal foods focused our diet is, the healthier we are, especially if we're in reproductive age. trying to produce healthy babies, trying to grow healthy children, you do better. And there's plenty of science to back this up. Choline in eggs, carnitine, all kinds of compounds that are not available from plant foods are essential for long-term thriving, not just of an individual lifespan, but for humanity itself.
Mm-hmm. So what are the worst foods when it comes to oxalates? Maybe people don't want to do a full carnivore approach. What are some foods you'd say to people, look, just don't eat these things and you'll do better than if you did have them?
Well, in some ways, it's almost better. Like if you're going to have a meat-centric diet, which is a lovely decision, I'm all for that. And then you're adding in vegetables and fruits and foods that can be less toxic than some of the worst ones, then the list of the ones you can have is almost easier. So most of the cabbage family vegetables are very low in oxalate. And so you can include them, but you want to cook them as much as possible. Don't keep eating raw kale salads, raw kale smoothies. Go ahead and cook it. Cook it well, cook it long. Same, there's lots of vegetables in that cabbage family. Not essential for health, but they're handy and they're around a lot and people like them. So then there's the vegetables that are the leafy greens. All of them, except chard, beet greens, spinach, and sorrel, are low. So all the lettuces are fine. So a standard romaine lettuce salad, a nice sort of Caesar salad with some eggs and anchovies in there and cheese, like that's a really nice thing to have. So lettuces, cabbage family, white rice, some of the teas, herbal teas are fine. Whereas the black tea, the dark chocolate, the pseudo grains, if you're on a low gluten diet, you don't really want to go with the buckwheat and the soba noodles. That's really high in oxalate. That's up there with rhubarb, really high in oxalate. As I mentioned, quinoa and chia seeds, which are something. No. Stay away from seeds generally. Seeds have all kinds of these plant toxins. They're protected. They're designed to be indigestible. They tend to mess up your digestion. Minimize seeds. If you want a seed crunchy thing, the low oxalate one is pumpkin seeds. So sprouted pumpkin seeds in moderation, if you have a healthy gut, are fine to have as a snack. So there's ways where you can have things kind of fill out your carnivore diet, look a little normal once in a while. You can do it. You can do it and you can have diversity. And in many cases, women especially don't do well over the long term on ketones, which are acidic. You need to manage your metabolism so you're not too acidic, and don't do well low carb long term. Some people do much better sleeping with some rice or some fruit juice. Fruit juices are another refinement where you get rid of some of the noxious parts, but it's pretty sugary. So you need a nice insulin production and you need cells that know how to pick up glucose. If you have enough minerals and nutrients, you should produce enough insulin. And if you stay active enough, you should not have insulin resistance. It's not really the sugar causing the insulin resistance. It's the other kind of nutrient deficiencies and imbalances and toxicities that are interfering with glandular function. Oxalates, for example, can probably kill your beta cells and certainly put crystals in your pancreas and turn on that inflammation that can later create type 1 diabetes or sluggish production of insulin that can contribute to diabetes like syndromes where we blame insulin resistance, but the poor pancreas needs to work.
Mm-hmm. One thing you said there is that women don't tend to do well long-term on low-carb diets. Now, what I find often with women is that, with this whole diet culture, they eat very small portions, so even when they come on carnivore, they're eating very small meals. Do you think it's possible that the reason women don't do well long-term on a low-carb diet is just because they're chronically undereating?
That can be the case because there's a certain kind of eating disorder that goes along with being poisoned and being malnourished, and it's not a character flaw. It's another symptom of physical problems. And human beings, I think it's really interesting because human beings have long sought out some carbs, like the honey is a big deal. We have a strong gravitation to carbs and sweetness on the tongue, and we're designed that way. So in the spring, native wild humans would look for some kind of plant that they could process and get some carbs out of it. So I think it's a pretty natural thing for humans to seek carbs in a reasonable amount. Not all the time, not every meal, not year round, like time off from carbs, cycling carbs, whatever. But enough carbs to keep your metabolism going. I think for some of us, you get low enough muscle glycogen, low enough kind of sugar levels, and a bit of a stress with the sugar maintenance for some people that it's just much easier to go ahead and provide some carbs. So I don't think people should feel guilty and demonize carbs. What we need to do is demonize toxins. And a little bit of sugar and a little bit of starch is hardly a toxin. We're designed for it. That's why we have the taste buds for it. I wish we had taste buds that said, ooh, oxalates taste bad. But in fact, we do, because children hardly ever will eat spinach. You have to force them to eat spinach. It's a learn. Human beings, unfortunately, are more learning in terms of food preferences rather than instinctual.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think if we meditated more and were outside more and did more natural food production, maybe we'd be more instinctual. But we're such a brainy, you know, we're so up here and we're so dependent on socialization for survival because of the long childhood we have and the need for cooperation and communities and tribes in order to survive. You know, we're just these little naked, wimpy weaklings. We really, it's our cunning that makes us having taken over the planet. And so this need to cooperate is part of this like stupidity with what we eat. Like the minute someone says chia bowl, do it, and they do it, and they say, "Oh, this is great." You just learn, "Oh yeah, this is fun." We're also very creative. We love to invent things, and we invent the chia bowl, we invent the juicer, we then sell the juicer, and then we say, "Oh, using it every day is really good for you." You know, we love novelty, and we keep learning our way into doing some dumb things.
Mm-hmm. See, the one thing that my concern with adding carbohydrates into the diet is that it's very hard to get them from a non-toxic source. You know, obviously things like wheat, we know they have a long list of defense compounds. We could go here all day about the problems with wheat, same with vegetables, and then even with fruit. Yes, it does, you know, give us the carbohydrates, which could be argued they're good for us, but it also comes along with defense compounds, and it gives us extreme amounts of these carbohydrates with crossbreeding in the last 12,000 years. What carbohydrate source would you recommend to people?
You know, this is an area for research, I think. I think that white rice is pretty nice, and I've personally find that it refined white rice into Chinese rice noodles is pretty digestible and pretty tolerable and a pretty nice. It does have the resistant starch, you know, and too much resistant starch, I think it has overgrowth of colonic bacteria. I'm not real big on like ginormous amounts of bacteria in your colon. I'm not big on fermentation, you know, so you have to kind of moderate it. But I think white rice, I like to take a white rice that's grown in soils that aren't too arsenicy, which the research suggests Asian grown white rice is much lower in arsenic than rice is grown in North America, where we've ruined the soil with pesticides and so on, and it's higher arsenic levels. And then soaking it, maybe in some bentonite clay added to it to get rid of more of the arsenic, but really just water soaking will lower phytates and arsenic. You rinse it, you cook it, or you refine and you ferment it. So in order to make a Chinese rice noodle, there's a fermentation stage. So there's quite a bit of that detoxification that goes into making a good Chinese rice noodle. So that could be an option for people. And of course, noodles are very popular in the Western culture. Like you can easily get a child to eat a few noodles. Like if you switch over to rice instead of wheat, that's a big improvement. So if your family is not ready to give up pasta, an Asian rice noodle could be a transition food. And it could also be a carb loading food if you're carb cycling or need to get a little hit of carbs to get a good night's sleep. Fruit juices work for some people. You know, you could, I don't know. It's a big question how to get a carb.
It is very tough because, yeah, as we've got,
I will occasionally, if I really need a carb bad, I will make hot water with a tablespoon of molasses in it and sip on it slowly, like it looks like coffee. And that'll give me a little bit of a boost, and I'll start waking up again and start functioning again just to get a little bit of carbs. So that's like a hot soda, but man, it works for me. Because it is tough to get a good source of carbs that you can trust to not cause other problems. And you know, but keep your diet rich in nutrients with meat and good fats so that you're not vulnerable to being hooked on them, because you're really eating them as a medication, I think, not necessarily for the pleasure. Of course, you want to eat for pleasure, but in this world, we're so oversaturated with carbs, and we have such a history, many of us personal history of being carb addicted. I mean, you literally can get addicted to carbs, and getting off of the carb addiction can take years, especially if you're afraid to eat a big stick of butter. You need to really go heavy, like you said, good portions of foods that we've been told are bad. Like a good fat juicy steak and a big stick of butter, we've been told are the end of your life. You'll drop dead tomorrow. But in fact, that's the answer to not being a carb addict.
Mm. So when someone comes to you and you say to them like, look, I think your problems are caused by these foods that you've been told are good for you. And everyone else they go to, their doctor, their nutritionist, they're telling them about how great spinach is. And they sort of look at you with a bit of shock. How do you manage to get through to these people that, trust me, I'm right on this one?
Well, people have to be ready to hear something different. They have to be over themselves and let go of their own hubris about how much they know. And if they're not willing to step back and go, you know what, maybe I'm teachable today. Maybe I can be receptive to a new idea that's worked for many people, a hidden idea I haven't tried yet. You really have to talk to someone who's humble enough and open enough. And usually that's a total stranger. So if you're trying to affect your sister, forget it. Your mother, your grandma, no, you're lucky if you live in a family that will listen to you. Hug them, kiss them for me, because I'm not in that family. So very few of my followers are. So yeah, bring it up to the lady whose cart ahead of you is full of 3 boxes of spinach, a bunch of cocoa powder, dark chocolate bars, and chia bowls. But I ask them, do you have any arthritis? Do you have any aches and pains? Are you tired? Do you have trouble sleeping? Do you have to run to the bathroom? Are you leaking on yourself? Yeah. I'm like, well, that's all in your cart.
Uh-huh. So there's no easy way to do it, is what you're saying.
No, I've never tried to convince someone who isn't, people come to me. I just said, hey, I screwed up. My life has been terrible. I'm a mess. Don't do what I do. Let me be your bad example. And then people say, hey, I relate to you, Sally. And they come to me. I just okay, come to me. I see the need to inform people though, because those of us who are really noticing this, we're all in grandmother stage and we're watching our grandchildren be fed wrong. Now, I'm not technically a grandmother, but I have lots of clients and followers whose hearts are breaking over the way their kids are feeding their kids. So they have to watch these families give their kid chocolate cake on their first birthday, beets, soy formula, sweet potatoes, you name it. They're putting spinach in modern, fancy, expensive baby foods are loaded with these high oxalate foods, spinach, quinoa, beets, all rolled into one nasty package that's overpriced. And they can't do anything about it. So there is a real need to try to get people to wake up. So it's important to those of us who are in our 60s and beyond to reach people in their teens and 20s and ask them, please, please, we've already made these mistakes. Please let us help you.
Well said. What do you eat in a day?
Well,
what does a typical day look like?
This is not the question we want to talk about, because oxalates and probably some other things that are equally controversial have caused me to have a reaction to red meats that gives me an autoimmune condition. So I can't touch red meats at all. But I'm lucky enough to be able to eat pork and seafood. So my diet is very much lots of sardines, lots of baked flounder and halibut and oysters and mussels and roe and pork in every way, shape, and form, pork skin, pork this and pork that. And you can do a lot with pork and seafood and butter. And I eat coconut and, oh gosh, I have 3 or 4 seasonings I can use. And I eat a simple, weird diet that makes it hard to eat out. And you, at least when you can eat beef, you can look normal and go to a steakhouse. I don't even get that. But I feel better and I'm functioning better and I've stopped aging. I'm going to be 61 soon. And some people don't even believe it. I show up to see
you don't look a day over 40 in my eyes, Sally. You're doing great. I might have to switch my diet to yours.
Yeah.
I've never heard this before, red meat causing an autoimmune condition. How did you discover it was the red meat and not, some other plant in your diet?
Okay, so I went full carnivore on April 1st in 2019, which was, a while back. It'll be 6 years ago. And really good at cooking meat. Oh, I make a really good chuck roast, a really good rib roast, a really good, New York strip and ribeye steak. Like, I know how to cook delicious beef. And I learned from the carnivore world, like, oh, like eat tons of it, not like the dietitian portion of meat. Like eat a pound of meat. Like, okay. So so I learned to do that mega portion where you're saying, women are shy about doing that. And it takes a while, I don't think anyone does well with abrupt diet changes for many reasons. So it's be patient with yourself and change. But so I'm in love with this lifestyle of getting to eat a lot of meat. But it got to the point within a couple years where at least half the time, if not more, eating that meal of meat would make me fatigued and carb craving. And I don't have a carb addiction. I don't have any food addiction stuff. I did when I was a vegetarian. And I just tried to ignore that. Don't ignore that. If you, after a meal, you don't feel right, you don't feel, you want carbs or you feel tired and you can't function. If you can't function after a meal, you need to change your diet. And I was too lazy to do that because I was busy writing my book and helping other people. And it's paying attention to myself, my personality type, self-neglect, worry about everybody else. Well, time goes by and I get COVID. And so after COVID, I started having these symptoms of this disease, this autoimmune disease, but I didn't think of myself as getting a new disease. I just didn't, again, I let it go on too long. So when it finally dawned on me, I think it was in 2022 in April, probably, that I needed to stop eating beef because of these symptoms were getting bad. And within 10 days, the symptoms start reversing and it's now in remission. And I am 100% convinced. I know my body. You're never going to talk me out of this because I wouldn't even touch a gelatin capsule in a supplement now because this autoimmune thing is serious. So the thing about, I was eating beef while I was sick with COVID. So when your immune system is overactivated, it can start being overreactive to more things. And I think this whole problem of having crystals in my body and being in this oxalate reduction process for years just increased the tendency for me to have hypersensitivities and allergies. And my food hypersensitivities and allergies really became obvious after my second complete round of vaccines when I went to graduate school. So I started having some food issues as a teenager, but later in my early 30s when I went for graduate school, it was during graduate school I started having wheat and legume allergies. And during these years of deaccumulation of oxalate, it hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse. And with that COVID infection in the middle of it, yeah. So
wow, interesting.
It's scary.
Was it aged beef or just your regular old?
Well, I used to buy half and quarter cows and get my beef from local farmers, and where I know how it's raised and all that. And then during this time of writing my book, it's really because COVID, you couldn't get the local beef anymore. Even though I'd been a loyal customer for 15 years, I was cut out of the deal. So I was buying, really nice premium beef from a really nice shop here that is a fresh store that offers good quality meat at a nice price and a nice butcher counter where you can get what you want. And so I was cooking a lot of chuck roast, rib roast, and a lot of hamburger and decent meat. But it's not about the age. It's about proteins that you start to become sensitive to. I am a subtype that's not that common, thank goodness. But if you do what I do and eat really healthy your whole life, you could end up where you can't eat anything.
It's fascinating that paradox, isn't it? The health foods may not be that way.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I've always been a foodie and a big eater. I'm the tallest of all my siblings for my gender and all that. And I always loved food as a kid. I would eat more than anyone else. And I liked a variety of food. I liked weird adult foods. And I love cooking and creative cooking and doing all the different, ethnicities in the kitchen. And life has stripped me down in a very spiritual way to something pretty simple. It's okay. I know nobody else wants that, but with a carnivore diet, people are voluntarily limiting, if you call it that, themselves to something that helps them feel well. Imagine eating for your health. Imagine eating so you feel great, so you're happy, so you can do what you want, get fit. Imagine that.
Mhm.
Poor you.
I think most people don't even realize what the other side looks like. You know, when you've got low energy and you just feel average every day, got no motivation, people don't put two and two together and work out it's the food. But you
Yeah,
know, what,
they start owning it as their personality.
mhm.
You can normalize anything in this society of Western life here at this time of history. We're normalizing a lot of strangenesses in our, normalizing medicating children, normalizing differences in the way the brain is working that are much more stark than they ever were. When I was growing up, we didn't use the word autism. Of course, it was there, but not in the stark, dysfunctional, painful way in which families and children suffer greatly with a condition that is, it's not just being different, it's like suffering.
Mm. Yeah, you are right about the normalization of things. In fact, I've seen people online now talking about how if you just eat health foods, if you don't eat any of this chemical processed garbage, you have an eating disorder because you shouldn't be scared of certain things. What do you reckon about that?
Yeah, I love how we get to label people for making an effort to choose a healthy life. It's the same mentality as people in the hood who don't want you to leave the hood because you might have a better life out there if you go off and get your associate's degree and go get a career and move out of the crime-ridden neighborhood. Like you're bad for doing that. That's kind of that same mentality.
Mm, absolutely. Well, Sally, thank you very much for coming on today. Not that I ate spinach, but if I did eat spinach, I'd never eat it again. So for all the people that are like me and they're thinking of changing a few things up, where can they check more of you out?
Please come to my website, which is real simple, sallyknorton.com. There's a lot of free information there. And also check out my YouTube channel, which is also Sally K. Norton. There's some testimonials there. There's 25 shorts. And on my website, if you look hard under support, you'll find a shopping page and you can get to resources, many of which are free or very inexpensive. You can also get this fancy data companion that has all the information about what foods have how much oxalates and color coded in there, and useful tool. And out there in the world of book buying, you can find toxic superfoods wherever books are sold. And you can also find it in 5 other languages, which includes Spanish, German, Polish, Vietnamese, Chinese. And next year it's meant to be coming out in French as well. So if you have international friends who speak other languages or prefer to read other languages, that's available too.
Awesome. Brilliant. I'm feeling nice today. So for all of you watching, I'll chuck all those links in the description. Thank you very much for coming on.
It's good to be with you.
Cheers.